Earlier this week, Pro Football Focus came out with an article where they evaluated all 32 teams' rookie classes, that's drafted and undrafted rookies, by snap counts, by wins above replacement, and by PFF grades. Saints get a pretty good review from them on these categories. What we're going to do is I'll walk you through the whole process of the article, and we'll try to answer some questions that pop up, such as, hey, did the Saints actually draft franchise quarterback and left tackle in 2025? What about Sanker and Riley, who came up to become starters by the end of the season? And what about the remaining rookies? Going to answer all three of those questions. Plus, I'm going to give you 4 big takeaways I got from the article. I'm Tim. Let's talk Saints. So before we dive in, 2 points that I need to bring up. One is scheduling. This was supposed to be the video on the linebackers and defensive backs to finish out the defense. In the midst of recording that, Saints re-signed Julian Blackman, which answered one of the questions in the video and opened up some more. So I'm letting it breathe till next week just to see if we get any more signings or clarifications on some of the stuff that I'll be talking about. Second thing is, when we're talking about the 2025 Saints rookie class in this video, we're going to reference an article from Pro Football Focus, PFF, where they are bringing up points about every team's rookie class, and we'll go through what they have to say about the Saints, provided on to their stats, PFF grades, and their win above replacement, which is WAR is the acronym for it. And before we get into the explanation of that and then jump into what I think it means, I want to clearly state that while I appreciate analytic stuff like WAR and the PFF film grades and the way they do things, and for the most part, their methodology, I am not a die on the hill type guy where it is or they are the end all be all stats. What I do think they do is provide a pretty solid baseline to try to draw some conclusions from information. But context matters and other things matter, and we'll get into that a little bit. So it is not the final say so. So I'm not one of those people that hate stats like that or completely love them at face value. I think they can be very useful in certain areas when you're trying to figure some stuff out. So to understand this chart by PFF representing our rookie class and what it means, there's a couple categories we have to take a deep dive into: WAR, or win above replacement, and the PFF grade itself. And the two numbers are actually, in a weird sort of way, kind of connected. But let's go ahead and take an example of 3 players. And in this example, we're going to use left tackle, column 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to chart through a game in which each of them had 60 snaps and try to show the correlation of how this is a meaningful stat. There's value in it. We are going to try to do this in under 2 minutes. Good luck to me. Wins above replacement, or WAR. Now, our 3 left tackles, each in their individual games with their 60 snaps. We're going to make 3 plays for each of them is a loss. Now, why this is important. A PFF grade of 60.0 is basically a tie. In their minds, they're looking at each individual play as a win, a loss, or a tie. At 60.0, the average was on 60 snaps, they tied in all 60 of them. 3 of their snaps were clear losses. Let's say sacks, the type of play where everybody, every fan in the stadium are watching on TV, me included, going, man, that guy sucks. We're also going to add in 3 plays where they were clear wins. And what we're talking about here, let's just say a run block where they completely pancake their assigned defender, flatten him to the point where every fan watching it live goes, oh my God, that was devastating. What a great player. Or the type of plays that are going to see in an endless loop on Twitter, or that particular team website is going to show that in the highlight reel. So now those 3 wins have canceled out the 3 losses. All 3 players are back at 60.0. And it's the next 54 plays that kind of define everything. Because LT2, his wins equal his losses plus his ties. Basically, He is finishing at 60.0 grade. LT1 in his remaining 54 snaps had more wins than his combined losses and ties, while LT3 had the opposite effect. His losses were greater than his wins plus his ties. So LT1 has moved his grade into basically a passing grade. And the more wins he has over those losses and ties, the greater that grade's going to be. And of course, LT3 is in the reverse. The more losses he has over his wins plus his ties, the lower that grade's going to be. Wins above replacement WAR, what they're trying to do in PFF in their formula uses that 60.0 grade significantly as kind of the average and looking to see what happens when you replace one player with another player when you have enough information, in this case, 60 snaps for each of the three, to draw a conclusion. Their formula, when it comes to the wins part, so how much does that represent in winning? And by this winning, we mean games, not singular plays, but the number of games. I'm not so sure that they've convinced me of their methods and their outcomes. But what they have convinced me is this is a type of wins above replacement or WAR where I can look at it and reasonably think, yes, by substituting LT3 with LT1 in this scenario, we have just greatly increased our chance of winning football games. And I think where this has real value is when you start looking throughout the roster. How many times have you brought in players where you go from a scenario from replacing LT3 with an LT1 or even replacing LT2 with LT1, in which case you're winning amongst your roster and the players you're adding, as opposed to replacing LT1 with a 2 or a 3, in which case you're now losing. How many times you're replacing them with the exact same player where we replaced LT2 with LT2, but we did it with a better contract or a younger player, or ideally with a younger player and a better contract. So, real quick wrap up before we jump into kind of answering some questions. One thing about PFS final calculations, they have an article on their website that kind of explains everything going on with WAR. And that win above replacement number 0.75, let's say, for a player, it's basically telling you about 75% chance of increasing to a win with that player replacing a lower valued player. One of the things about their final determination and their numbers when I was reading the articles, every now and then there was a couple of things I had questions about or maybe just didn't understand fully. So I can't fully get behind the value of when they give you that 0.75 number. But one thing that did bother me was verbatim, assuming a team of replacement level players is from a 3-13 team. Let's start with 3-13. That's 16, 17 game schedule. I'm assuming that's a typo, but I don't really know for sure. There may be a reason they're figuring on 16 games and they're not telling. The other thing is assuming. I don't mind assumptions when you're doing stuff like this. I'm going to tell you about a big one I made in just a second, but please tell me about it and let me know why you're assuming this replacement value from a team of a 3-13 record. My assumption is on snap counts. Very hard to every NFL team, different number of snap counts. It's going to be north of 1,000, but 1,000 is a very workable number because when I start talking about specific player snap counts, I can kind of turn it into a percent of, hey, that's about 90% of their snaps. Put it in a frame of reference. The Saints had 1,127 offensive snaps. Using the number of 1,000, if we were to lower it down to that, we're still representing roughly 88, 89% of the Saints' total snaps. So I think that's a workable number overall. And when I'm talking about, hey, they had 250 snaps, that's exactly 25% of 1,000, makes it easier to work with in that aspect. So that's the assumption I made. So know that when I start giving you those numbers, the actual numbers are going to be slightly higher, but probably not much more than 10% at worst. Question number one, the most, I think, probably obvious one, and this is stuff people have already been talking about, including me, since the season was actually going on, much less the off season. But when this article came out, I'm looking at it and go, does this prove we drafted our franchise quarterback and our franchise left tackle in 2025? My opinion, no. It does not prove it, at least not yet. Because what I'm looking at there with the numbers for Shough and Banks, they both played exceptionally well as rookies. There's no doubt about that. And when you want to start using the word franchise, I think you can't use it yet because you only have 1 year, basically. And you need to see a high level of play for more than 1 year. And more importantly, you need to see that high level improve from year to year. I think that's what makes when you want to use the word franchise. You could still wind up with very good football players. And I think both of them are definitely trending in that direction. But way too early to be throwing the franchise tag around. We'll know more at the end of 2026 season, and I think at some point in 2027 we'll know for sure one way or the other. But specifically, what this is showing is for both these players. Look, Tyler Shough had their highest rookie grade for PFF quarterback and their highest win above replacement. Giants rookie quarterback Jackson Dart not necessarily that far behind. I think it's a solid lead, but it's not put away when you're going to have the discussion of all the available quarterbacks in the draft, which one has the best chance if you want to start using the franchise word. I think these are your two guys. And I think so far, 1 year worth of data shows that Shough is the better of the two options. You look at Kelvin Banks, it's a very similar conclusion. At 1,000+ snaps, that's basically a full season. So you have really good information there. The other two tackles you talk about is Mabau for the Jets, 1,000+ snaps. Will Campbell, who had a little bit of an injury problem, he comes in just north of 900 snaps, but I think that's close enough to draw parallels between the three. They were the first three tackles taken, all in the top 10. Kelvin Banks had the second highest PFF rookie grade for a tackle, both sides. In third in WAR. Campbell was the flip side of that. Third in PFF grade, second in WAR. Mabau was first in both categories, but here's the kicker. He played right tackle while Campbell and Banks played left. So I think also after 1 year of data, you can draw a logical conclusion that the Saints drafted one out of top two players available to them in that rookie class at both left tackle and quarterback. So if you want to give yourself a chance at rebuilding in a draft, you need to use your high picks because this was our first in Banks and our second in Shough. You need to use your high picks to give yourself a chance at rebuilding. And one of the ways you do that is you get quality football players with a lot of potential to develop to become even better, elite, dare we say, franchise players eventually over the next couple of seasons while they're sitting on a rookie contract, which allows you to spend money and other assets in other areas to build around them until the point where eventually you're going to have to pay them. And if you keep this process going in the subsequent drafts of their second and third years before you have to start thinking about paying them, you keep adding the same type of players at other positions, you can keep this evolving. These how the perennial playoff teams that we've seen over the last few years as the landscape of the NFL changed. This is how they get where they need to be, but keeping the trend going, it's how they stay there. So I think overall, the Saints have to keep them on the field. They have to keep them playing at a high level, and they have to keep developing them. You get those three things out of them, I feel pretty sure that when you start talking about wins above replacement, within a year or two, it's going to be really difficult to start finding the players you need to get more wins over those two. But you start failing in any of those three categories that I just mentioned, which is basically health, play, and developing better play, well, all bets are off, and potential war may come into it where you say, I have to swap player one out for player two, like we talked about in the example. But I feel like a lot of the data, and then more importantly, the stuff we saw with our eyes that isn't empirical, there's a lot there saying so far so good. but we need to keep the wheel rolling. So looking at the PFF war data and grades for the next two players that we want to talk about, which is Jonas, Sanker, Quincy, Riley. So what are those PFF war numbers and their grades tell us about those two players? And if you look at where they're sitting, I'm gonna say on the face value of it, a little bit, but not as much as I think if you add some context to both their situations, it'll tell you a lot more. Now, what I mean by that is both players were originally drafted more for initially, really, special teams was mentioned a lot for both of them, some providing some help there, but also, hey, look, these guys are going to provide depth with expectations that we will turn them into starters eventually. And I think the thinking was by 2026. Well, for both of them, it came a year early. If it was the initial was 2026, because it happened in 2025 and it happened under two different, very different circumstances, but both of them equally as challenging for a rookie. Sanker winds up being the starter because Julian Blackman goes down in game one with the season ending shoulder injury. So all of a sudden, he's now becoming our starting safety opposite Justin Reed. And to add even more context to this, when Sanker came out, he was primarily thought of as a box type safety because his combined snaps in the box and adding the slot on the inside, basically near the line of scrimmage in college. 3 years at Virginia, he had 1,641 snaps combined in the box or playing slot, 570 snaps playing deep, 3-to-1 ratio inside over deep. In his rookie year last year, it was 332 snaps combined in the box or slot and 649 snaps deep. So 2-to-1 ratio, the opposite direction. That's not an easy thing for a veteran safety to do, although it is doable, but it is incredibly hard concept and execution of concept when you're going to take a rookie who spent most of his time in college playing here and going, well, we need you to play more back there. You under normal conditions, that would be set up for a fail. But here's the thing: Jonas Sanker didn't fail. And in Riley's case, it was a very similar situation, but for different reasons, because I think the expectation was Yidam or Yadam, Isaac Yadam is here to, hey, hold down the fort for 1 year because we have this young corner we drafted we really, really like, we think, and not only the Saints, this was mentioned a lot during the draft, that there's a potential NFL starter out there that they have on their roster that's going to show up in about a year or so. And that came soon this time because, frankly, Yadam did not play well at all. And the decision was made. We'd rather roll Riley out there. Valuation development was part of it, but I think deep down, sincerely, everybody expected we'll be better with him on the field. And quite honestly, we were. So I think you have to include this context when you start looking at their PFF grades are both good, win more than they fail. They have a positive WAR. So they were going to add replacement value over the replacement level player, that kind of mid-ranged average player. I think if you add into the context that had they started the season from the jump with expectations, hey, Jonas, you're going to play free safety and be the starter. Riley, you're going to play opposite of Kool-Aid on the corner. Could they have been better? Probably. Now that they have a full off season with the coaching staff and in the system and lots of trial by fire experience while they were playing in the system last year in 2025, I think you could say, yes, this is another area where the trend to add wins by replacing these two guys is pretty good. Now, in Sanker's case, and we'll get into this a little deeper when we do talk about the DBs, it'll probably be in a slightly different role, but it's damn good to know that in a pinch, he can go back there and handle it. The more he does it, the more experience he gets, and the more they develop him, the better he'll be at it. Same thing from Riley working on the outside. full time, opposite Kool-Aid. So you think with they're giving you their positive WAR and their passing grades in PFF in the context of how they wound up being starters, I think absolutely proves what they were looking for in the draft when they drafted them, which is reliable depth that can come in and eventually be a starter. They managed to knock out both those things in the same season as rookies. So the third question, what about the remaining rookies? What are we learning from these evaluations? The honest to God answer is after Neal and Stutzman, not a whole lot. The four names we've talked about so far are 50% or above, closer to 80%, 90%. Really, when you talk about Banks and Sanker, they pretty much started roughly 16 games or so between each of them. So more valid numbers, I think. The more that snap count gets lower and you're trying to do this evaluation, the harder and harder it is to get meaningful numbers. Neal and Stutzman both came in about 25% of the snaps, roughly. And I think what we saw, and you look at their PFF grades, it's kind of corresponding. So trending in the right direction in the sense of Neal, 58.7, Stutzman, 71.5 overall grades. Neal showed us, I think he's a very good receiving running back, showed good vision and cuts, but still needs some work in the rushing area, specifically in some of the schemes we do, and kick up his blocking, make it a little better. I think both doable things. Stutzman looked really good in limited capacity and brought some good things to the table. Overall, with their positive wars also, I think it's safe to say that these guys are on the verge of being developed and made better, which is going to solidly put them in, hey, they can definitely be reliable replacement players if we need them. And in Stutzman's case, especially, maybe we can get him up to if we need him to start, nobody's going to sweat about it because we know they can do the job. Mataval, Diggs, Broughton, less than 10 snaps. That's potential. You're talking about Diggs and Mataval. They were seventh round, almost projects, and not enough snap counts to see how much ground they made there. Broughton was planned on to be in the rotation, got in the second game, and only played 24 snaps. That's technically less than a half of football, or right around a half of football. So not much you can read in with those three. 2026 is going to be big for all three of them, there's no doubt. In between, you've got Simpkins, less than 20% snaps. He's somewhere around 16, 17% of the overall Saint snaps. But clearly, on that limited basis, there is one thing that stands out with his overall PFF grade being down in the 40s. When you look at the two major components of it, his run blocking grade, not that far below 6.0, 59 and some change, 58 ish. A little bit of improvement there. You're at least going, hey, he's not losing anymore as much as he's winning, and he's really close to have done that already. It's a pass blocking grade, which was below 10, I think 4.7, something like that. That's basically losing every single snap in pass blocking. So wide range of variety there. Undrafted free agent. So the fact that you were able to get some meaningful snaps out of him says something. And again, this 2026 offseason, preseason is going to be huge for him. So to try to wrap this up and put a bow on it, the four kind of takeaways of individual points I'm pulling from this. One, we knew the Saints desperately needed to get themselves through a rebuild by adding starting quality players on rookie deals where you had them locked down and you could start using assets elsewhere else. And if you could do it at quarterback, fantastic. But you had to start in 2025. You had to draft a quarterback, find out if he's the guy or not, and then make your decisions from there. Successful in two accounts on that. So I think you got a great start at left tackle. You got a great start at quarterback. And as we talked about, going to need to see more development. We're going to have to keep them healthy and keep getting them better. But even attempting to find them, and be amongst the best of those available to you to draft, I think you did that. So you're starting yourself from a pole position in the race where, okay, we got two spots that are up in the front, going to be key to completing this rebuild as fast as we can. Second thing is Saints needed to add that offensive lineman that we just talked about. Check mark on that. So now you're adding a piece on that all important offensive line. You can anchor, hopefully, but definitely is going to give you really good play on a rookie deal a couple of years before you got to worry about, hey, what are we going to do? And here's the kicker. You now did it 2 years in a row because you have Fuaga on the right side. And after years of drafting horribly early in the draft on offensive linemen, you got two. Need to keep that situation rolling. And this is a draft where you still have some holes. There's some available players to get it. Good draft decisions. And you land another one and do that 3 years in a row. That's how teams build and keep retooling and reloading offensive lines over long periods of time. And you know what most of those teams do? Make the playoffs just about every year. Good head start there. Got to keep that one rolling. Third one, and this is one that I've harped on a lot, and it's the Jimmy and Joes. And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about when I say Jimmy and Joes, those are the guys that they're not elite players. You know they're not elite players. They may become elite players, but it doesn't matter if they do or don't because it is impossible to slap 53 super elite studs on an NFL roster. What you need is a bunch of guys like that can handle everything else, win more than they lose on each individual play, and your super studs are going to take care of the rest and are going to make the plays that you need to win a lot of games and push for a championship. So you can have 10 super studs in your team, but if the other 43 guys are terrible, you're still going to struggle to win. And I think in this draft, especially, good examples of those Jimmy and Joes. And even better examples is you get those type of players in, and they're the right players. And we talk a lot about how the coaching staff talks about bringing in the right players. They respond to tough situations, can beat the expectations you put on them, and wind up being honestly, and when I say Jimmy and Joe's, I want to be perfectly clear. This is not being disrespectful. I think it's a very important part of building your NFL team. That's what Sanker and Riley was supposed to be in 2025. They became starters. And you can keep doing that in drafts. And I don't know if you can get as many as you got out of this draft, basically with four of them. If you can, you're going to rebuild this even faster than you were expecting. But as long as you can keep adding one or two at this point and keep knowing pieces of our roster, good football players with the potential to get better, and we don't have to pay them a crap ton of money to keep them here for a couple of years. Again, the better franchises in the NFL that make playoff runs know how to do this. We may have just unlocked it and figured it out. Pretty much got to keep that going. And after a bit of technical difficulties and probably one bad jump cut that you just saw in editing process, the fourth thing is kind of alluded to it, I think, at this point. You have to get these three factors in consecutive drafts. And the more times you can keep stacking this up, and it doesn't have to be like we're basically 6 for 10 in my mind so far. 4 out of 10 in really, really good numbers. So hovering that around 50%, if you make 8 picks in 2026, and four of them fall anywhere between Stutzman and Shough in this order that we're talking about, you're doing that reloading. You're moving to the point where drafts are no longer about rebuilding, they're about reloading. So that's it for this one. Like I said, this was a kind of quick replacement because of circumstances for the linebackers and defensive back video. I'm fully hoping one way or the other that'll be the next one out, but it will definitely be the second one of next week. We're not going to delay it any more than that. Just keeping my ears on what's happening around the Saints roster. So, like what you saw in your first time here, please hit like, share, subscribe, all that fantastic stuff. Check out the Saints Film Room. I'll leave the playlist here because we have been doing a lot on both the offense and we started on the defense. Hope to finish it up next week. And I think there's some really good stuff in there people have been enjoying. So jump on in it. Till I see you next time, I'm Tim. Peace out and who dat.